Mr. Clark's back. Time to take a look at the origins of World War II, the rise of aggressive dictators. Some of the objectives we'll be taking a look at in this particular section. We'll be taking a look at different areas of the world, the Soviet Union and Stalin, Italy and the rise of Benito Mussolini, Germany and the rise of Adolf Hitler, as well as the aggressive actions of the Japanese during the 1930s. We'll look at the responses, which turned out to be really on the weak side by the British, the French, and the United States, as we kind of let these aggressive regimes begin to overrun different parts of the world. The fact that we didn't check them quickly enough is going to be one of the reasons why World War II is going to occur. You see the image here. You can see Hitler and the Japanese kind of setting their sights on the world, in particular here in this image, the United States potentially could be under attack next. This is a propaganda poster, serves as a warning to the American citizens that if we did not come together as a country, we could be in serious trouble. As we go through the questions, make sure you respond out on your Google Doc. This is a good way to organize your thoughts and kind of develop an understanding of kind of the origins of World War II. So you look at the Treaty of Versailles. Treaty of Versailles was signed at the conclusion of World War I. It established the League of Nations, but despite all these different things that went into the Treaty of Versailles, as well as the establishment of the League of Nations, it did not create a long-lasting peace. Delegates at the peace conference had difficulty compromising. There wasn't really a true consensus. We know that even our own president, Woodrow Wilson, who attended the Versailles Peace Treaty, did not get much of what he wanted enacted within the treaty, with the exception of the League of Nations. Some countries wanted to continue to gain territories. Others wanted revenge against the Germans. There's many who were disappointed with the terms of the treaty, even the origins of the German and Italian alliance that we'll be discussing in a bit. The fact that Italy, which was actually on the victorious side in World War I, did not get territory it had been promised, kind of creates some discontent in Italy. And of course, the Germans felt like they were completely wronged in regard to the reparations, $33 billion, and the idea that they had to accept blame for the war. United States, the fact we didn't join the League of Nations kind of rendered that institution powerless. 2, how do totalitarian and fascist values differ from that of democratic principles and goals? Fascism is an ideology. It was established in 1922 in Italy, rejected the concepts of equality and liberty. The key thing to do is they place the national goals above individual rights and freedoms. Strict censorship is implemented in a fascist society, and for that matter, it was in the communist society in the Soviet Union as well. As criticism of the totalitarian state was banned. You could not criticize Mussolini or Hitler. The young within those countries, the youth are indoctrinated, kind of brainwashed in some ways at a very young age, discourages them from critically thinking and kind of putting together the ideas that maybe they're not being treated fairly. Civil rights are not recognized, and minorities are unprotected. These themes that we see in Italy and Germany and even the Soviet Union, they're very common. There's a lot of commonalities within these totalitarian regimes. We kind of take a look at these countries in the context of them being very similar. 3, why did totalitarian regimes take hold in the years after World War II? Citizens in tough times are much more likely to embrace dramatic change when conditions in our countries are terrible. That's why during the Great Depression, there was fear in the United States that if things did not improve quickly, that the United States could have potentially looked to an alternative form of government. Economic hardships, destruction, bitterness left over from World War I were some of the leading causes that led to the rise of authoritarian dictators in these countries. As we learned in the period of time of World War I, Russia was overrun during World War I. They were on the side that was, they were actually on the victorious side eventually, but the side that really got hammered initially in the war before the United States was even involved in World War I. They were overrun by the Germans. Their situation was so poor and pathetic because the Tsarist system under Tsar Nicholas II had not prepared the country for modernization, and they kind of struggled. Eventually, the Tsar had to step down. An official term for that is to abdicate or give up the throne. After a short period of time where the provisional government under Alexander Kerensky took hold from, I guess, March through November of 1917, Kerensky continued to wage war during World War I, which further angered the Russian people who just wanted to get out of the war. This would lead eventually to the rise of Vladimir Lenin. Lenin controlled the Soviet Union as the new country became known as, from the period of time of the Russian Revolution, late 1917 into 1918 through 1924 and his death. After the death of Lenin, there was an initial power struggle in the Soviet Union. That was primarily between Joseph Stalin and Trotsky. Trotsky was the more moderate potential leader of the Soviet Union. Leon Trotsky had a strong following in the country, but the power brokers who really chose the next leader of the Soviet Union kind of like the hardline approach of Stalin. Stalin, as you can see, is illustrated in his quote here. Death is the solution to all problems. No man, no problems. People were afraid to speak against Stalin's rule. Opponents were sent to the gulags or killed. Millions were killed during the Great Purge. Propaganda aimed to make people think that Stalin was a benevolent leader, a father figure who knew what was best for them. Collectivization of the farms led to 10 million deaths. Now, collectivization was basically when they took over all the farmland within the country, and this led to a shortage of crops. It wasn't a very effective process. But Stalin continued to try to maintain kind of this false notion that he was a savior for the Russian citizens or Soviet citizens. Dictators during this period of time, too, were, very controlling to the point where people would not, speak out. When you think about those prisons and the gulags where people were killed, one of the things that Stalin did in the gulags where he killed millions during the Great Purge, randomly on some nights he would have everybody line up in the prison and he would have the prison guards just randomly shoot a couple people just to continue to have that fear instilled in them. They required throughout the Soviet Union to have big portraits of him, banners of him. You were supposed to have a picture of Stalin inside your home, hanging on the wall. Instead of having your children or whatever it might be, you might have a big picture of Stalin and then some more photos of your children. So they tried to make him almost like part of your family. And this is all part of a broader goal that dictators tried to do, as you look at question 6, was to establish a cult of personality. Most of you, I would assume, know a cult is a loyal following, a group that follows without question. So by establishing themselves as a godlike figure, all-knowing and infallible, this would create a situation where citizens would follow without question. This took place in Germany with Hitler, Stalin, and the Soviet Union. In Germany and the Soviet Union, they eliminated religion. The new religion would become worshiping the leader. Now, of course, in Italy, where Mussolini rose to power, they could not eliminate religion because of the close ties to the Catholic Church, but the ideology of fascism or the totalitarian states in general were opposed to religion. 7, why were Italians outraged after World War I? Well, we alluded to this a little bit earlier when we discussed the idea that the Italians felt like they were wrong with the peace treaty. They did not receive the land that they were promised. They had given their lives up, many of them, and not really receive the promises that the Allies had made to them. As frustration grew in Italy into the 1920s, Benito Mussolini emerged. He exploited bad economic conditions in Italy, post-World War I anger, and he moved forward to unite Italians behind the new fascist party in 1919. In 1922, after gaining widespread support, he threatened the Italian king, demanded that he be appointed to lead the government, or he, along with his black shirt followers, would march on Rome and take it themselves. King Victor Emmanuel III was nervous. He wasn't sure of the power of Mussolini, but fearing his power, he gave Mussolini a position in the government. Mussolini was the chancellor or the prime minister in Italy. Shortly thereafter, he would take full control and establish a totalitarian government. As we'll see, the leaders in Germany and in Italy, they looked to, in many ways, established, I guess, even more of a loyal following, coming up with nicknames for themselves like Il Duce or their leader or the boss. I think that's what it literally means in Italian. They eliminated all other political parties, so all you had left in Italy was fascism. Strict censorship's implemented. They used the secret police, the black shirts to intimidate the opposition, organized young groups or youth groups into groups that he would use and exploit for himself. He would indoctrinate, as we mentioned earlier, the young people. So you'd be taught in school about the greatness of Italy. Sometimes, too, they would amend historical writings to the point in which they eliminated some of the negative aspects of Italian history. During this period of time where Mussolini rose to power and took full control, the Italians were facing a lot of turmoil with the Depression, the disorder and chaos after World War I. People wanted a restoration of stability and peace. Mussolini promised to restore Italy to Italian greatness, much like Julius Caesar. He actually called himself a modern-day Julius Caesar. Despite surrendering many rights, people were really desperate during this period of time to see things improve in Italy. Next, moving into a couple of other regions, moving to Germany next. 11, how were the conditions and sentiments in Germany similar to those in Italy? Well, both were republics with weak governments. They were unable to keep order and prevent economic distress. People in both nations believed treaties after World War I betrayed them as they wanted more territory. We're going to see Hitler rise to power. He was from Austria, came from a lower middle class background. He had a background as a failed artist. Some speculate had he gotten into the art school in Vienna, maybe history would have turned out quite a bit differently. Maybe he would have been maybe a calmer personality. Maybe he'd just been a really laid back artist. Who knows? I mean, we certainly wish history was different. He did serve in World War I on the side of the Germans. He was wounded. He was temporarily blinded, so he came very close to dying a couple times during World War I. There's a story too of an American or Allied soldier who had basically a clear shot to take Hitler out, but because at that point in time Hitler had lost his weapon and was unarmed, he let him go. His decoration in World War I and his temporary blindness, I think for about 6 weeks he was blinded. Kind of used that as a rallying cry, saying that he nearly lost his life for Germany. He's going to continue to fight for Germany. Joined the Nazi Party after World War I. What happened to Hitler after his failed rebellion in 1924? This is called the Beer Hall Putsch, or the Beer Hall Rebellion. He actually had united people together in the beer hall. If you're familiar with Germany, you have these big long tables in there in their beer halls. And he basically was rallying people, giving speeches. He would step on top of the big table and speak to the people, and he took the people and his followers to the streets. His initial rebellion was put down. While in prison for the attempted rebellion, and history once again would have been quite a bit different had the Germans had a much stronger policy against treason. He might have been in prison for the rest of his life, or if he had committed treason in a country like the United States, we have the death penalty for something like that. While in prison, he wrote the book Mein Kampf. This means literally in German, my struggle. In his book, he outlined his plans for extreme nationalism, his proposal to unite all German-speaking areas together, the creation of a dominant or master race of Aryans, anti-Semitism against Jews. There's the cover of his book. Eventually, Hitler comes to power. He's released from prison. He reaffirms and takes control again of the Nazi Party. By 1933, he and his Nazi Party had gained tremendous support throughout Germany. The German president, Paul von Hindenburg, felt pressured in 1933 after the Nazis gained a lot of control in the German Reichstag, or legislature. He appointed him to the position of chancellor. Now, you may have heard the name Hindenburg before. That was the name of a German hot airship or blimp that blew up in Lakehurst, New Jersey. It was named after the president of Germany. After Hindenburg's death, Hitler assumed full power and dictator control in Germany. Much like Mussolini, he came up with a nickname for himself, Der Führer, or the leader. Very similar to Mussolini's nickname. Next, we'll look at Japan. So the Japanese began taking aggressive actions in the 1930s. The military dictatorship took control in Japan. Kind of the military, along with the emperor, were able to, kind of become much more aggressive. You can see one of the areas they went into. Japan invaded Manchuria, this region here of northern China. 1933, after the League of Nations condemned their aggressive actions, they instead quit the League of Nations. The military began assassinating anybody who opposed the military dictatorship. And one of the real reasons why Japan was becoming more and more aggressive during this period of time is its lack of resources. As an island nation, Japan did not have the resources it needed to manufacture and increase its power and standing in the world. How did economic problems in the 1930s impact foreign policy in Germany, Japan, other countries? Well, military leaders such as Hitler, Mussolini, the Japanese emperor, they believed that expansion could solve their country's economic problems. They could add additional natural resources, new markets for trade. This certainly could be a powerful thing for those countries. Question 19 is kind of based off both this chart as well as a quote. So if you look at the aggression and appeasement chart, keep in mind, too, appeasement is a term that means giving in to the demands of other countries in an attempt to avoid war. It's basically if you're getting bullied by another country, instead of fighting back, you say, all right, what do you want? Just leave me alone. I'll give you whatever you want. That's kind of the broad idea of that. So if you look here, this kind of relates a little bit to the quote that you might have read about in your reading. The best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of passionate intensity. So if you kind of look at the aggressive actions during this period of time, we mentioned Japan invading Manchuria in 1931. The League of Nations condemned the action. Japan withdraws from the League of Nations. 1935, Italy invades Ethiopia. League of Nations endorses sanctions against Italy, but does not enforce them. 1936, here come the Germans. They go into the Rhineland, a border territory between France and Germany. League of Nations denounced the move as a violation of the Treaty of Versailles. And the action they take, no action taken. Germany and Italy support the fascists in the Spanish Civil War. France, Great Britain, and the United States refuse to get involved or to provide weapons to the Democratic Republican forces. The League of Nations does nothing. 1937, Japan invades China. Japan is criticized for violating a peace treaty. Action taken, no action taken. Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss. World powers take no action to stop another violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany demands the Sudetenland, which is an area in Czechoslovakia. Instead, the Munich Pact is signed when British Prime Minister Chamberlain gives in to Hitler's demand because Hitler promised, he put his hand up and promised, if you give me the Sudetenland, I will not take any more territory. Well, we know he would continue to be aggressive. All right, so when you look at number 19, the League of Nations had neither the will nor the ability to stand up to the aggressors, and the dictators, on the other hand, were obsessed with achieving power and getting additional land. Why is the League of Nations so weak during this period of time? Well, the United States refused to join it. And one of the key reasons why the League of Nations was not taking actions, and some of the things we had looked at with the previous chart, is unlike the modern day United Nations, the League of Nations back then did not have a fighting force. Today, the United Nations has a military force of the coalition of troops from around the world can be deployed and sent into regions to stop aggressive actions. So we did make that change in the 1940s when we created the League. We changed from the League of Nations to the new United Nations. 21, what actions did Hitler take that violated the Versailles Treaty? Well, we looked a little bit at the chart. He was building up his military. He was required to have no more than 100,000 troops. But to tell you the truth, he began to build up his military much larger than that. He moved his troops into the Rhineland. We had mentioned that previously. It's kind of demilitarized zone between France and Germany. We mentioned Italy going into Ethiopia, and of course we can't see Africa on the map here, but if you head south along the eastern coast of Africa, Ethiopia is a little bit south there, the southern eastern portion. Spanish Civil War of 1936. Spanish General Francisco Franco, who was the leader of the fascist party in Spain. He attempted to take control in Spain. Franco received aid and help from other fascist countries, Italy and Germany. That's kind of a test for World War II in some ways. And Franco was victorious and assumed the position of fascist dictator in Spain. And he would outlive and outrule the other fascist dictators who were much more famous, and Mussolini and Hitler. Mussolini and Hitler are both deceased by 1945, and for almost 30 years after that, Franco was still leading Spain. '24, how did the Spanish Civil War foreshadow more aggressive conflicts in World War II? Hitler and Mussolini used the Spanish Civil War to train their armies and test their weapons. The lack of action by the Allies also foreshadowed the weakness of the League of Nations in face of German and Italian aggression. '25, why do European leaders follow the policy of appeasement? Well, this is a question many historians often ask. The horrors of World War I were still fresh in their minds. Some felt Hitler's demand to unite all German-speaking people together was reasonable. The Versailles Peace Treaty terms were too harsh on Germany. Many thought that once Hitler had added the territory he requested, he would be peaceful. Of course, he was not. Some felt Stalin and communism were a much graver or bigger threat than even Hitler. Some were more concerned about their own economic problems at the time, in particular the United States during the Great Depression, so we didn't want to necessarily commit troops around the globe. 26, how did Adolf Hitler justify his aggressive actions in Austria in 1938? In March 1938, Nazi troops swarmed into Austria. Hitler claimed he was simply uniting German-speaking people together, and Austria is a German-speaking country. As I alluded to before, the Anschluss, or unification of Austria and Germany, was officially complete. 27, why did Hitler stake claims to the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia? How did Czechoslovakia and its allies react to Germany's threat to the Sudetenland? The Sudetenland was a German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia that Hitler claimed should be part of a greater Germany. Czechoslovakia, along with their allies France, Soviet Union, threatened to go to war to protect Czechoslovakia, but instead we're going to have an agreement kind of behind the scenes here that the Czechoslovakians are not going to be very happy about. 28, how did the Munich Conference on September the 29th, 1938, attempt to solve the dispute over the Sudetenland? This was led by British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Western nations allowed Hitler to take the Sudetenland. In return, Hitler promised, and of course he had his fingers crossed behind his back when he put his hand up to promise. He promised not to seek any more territory. Just give me this little piece of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland. You give me this little piece here of the Sudetenland, I promise I'll be good. Czechoslovakia, of course, was furious because they had to give up their land, and they weren't even invited to the peace conference to kind of negotiate themselves. They felt like they'd been betrayed by Neville Chamberlain in Great Britain. Chamberlain went back to Great Britain. He had the paper in his hand. He began waving the document in his hand to the British citizens, claiming that he had negotiated peace in our time, a peace with honor. He even said that Adolf Hitler's not a bad guy. That's a quote from 1938 from Neville Chamberlain. Did Hitler honor the Munich Agreement? Well, we know a little bit about history even before we move forward. Of course not. Instead, in October 1938, he demanded the Polish port city of Danzig on the Baltic Sea, and before you knew it, we would be like one step away from the official start of World War II. Reflecting back on the lesson, what are some of the lessons that can be learned from the policy of appeasement with Hitler? How should this impact decisions the United States makes towards belligerent nations and leaders in the future? The appeasement of Hitler showed the nation should not give in to the demands of fanatical dictators. Since this period of time, America has been a little more proactive, even preemptive in some cases, and taken action against countries. In the aftermath of September the 11th, 2001, President Bush in 2003 took preemptive action, which in retrospect has been somewhat criticized, versus Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein from power. He argued, President Bush, that we can't trust Hussein in the aftermath of 9/11 to be truthful. Hussein denied having weapons of mass destruction. President Bush, based on intelligence information, which may have turned out to be faulty, believed that he did, and as a result, we went to war to remove Hussein from power. He was removed, tried, and executed by his own government, the Iraqi government, and he was removed from power and literally from earth. All right, so that'll wrap up our initial discussions here on World War II. As we move forward in the days and weeks to come, we'll see a lot of the battles, the fighting, the ongoing issues surrounding World War II from an American perspective. Until next time, Mr. Clark is out.